The Jets drafted 7 new players over the weekend. Where do they fit this year? We're talking expectations for the rookie class of 2024 today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, April 30th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Well, today on the show, we're going to talk about the rookie class of 2024. The Jets drafted 7 players over the weekend, and we're going to talk about expectations for each of these players during their rookie season in 2024. Now, I think we all know that the draft is not just about the rookie season. In fact, I would argue in many ways the rookie season is the least important season for draft picks because it's just a big transition to the NFL, and that's particularly true when we get to the later round picks. The earlier round picks, these are like the top flight players. These are the guys who are more plug and play than anybody else who's drafted. So I think there are bigger expectations for the guys who are drafted in the early stage of the process. But we're going to talk about the roles I think all 7 of these players could fit on the team. And we will begin with the guy who has the highest expectations, and that's Olu Fashanu. And the reason he has the highest expectations is the Jets drafted him 11th overall. And Fashanu begins his career presumably as kind of like the primary backup at the 2 tackle positions. And I think if the Jets had drafted somebody like Fulaga, who conceivably could have been a long-term right tackle, we'd be having a camp battle between him and Morgan Moses. I guess it's possible the Jets could try Fashanu out at right tackle and have him battle things out with Moses, but just because he's projected to be the long-term left tackle, I'm not sure whether that would really be the right move for him, because I think you would probably want him just focusing on the left side. I think you want him focusing on things like building up his strength, learning, having Tyron Smith take him under his wing, a low pressure situation. I think the plan most likely is for him to take over the starting role from Tyron Smith next season. Smith is now, if he wasn't already, Smith is now kind of like a 1-year player for the Jets. He's a 1-year bridge player to get you to a point where Olu Fashanu can start at left tackle. So, there's really little chance Fashanu is going to end up as the long-term right tackle. If this was Fulaga, who projects as more of a right tackle, then I could see having him battle out, see if he can take the job. But if you put Fashanu in a camp battle with Morgan Moses right now for the right tackle spot, well, he may win it, but next year he's moving over to left tackle anyway. So now he's going to have to learn a whole new. I mean, it's not an entirely new position, but essentially he'll have to learn a lot new, only to unremember it in a year. I think the cleanest way to do this is just to bring him in as the primary backup at the left tackle position, and then if you have an injury with Morgan Moses, you can think about maybe plugging him in if he's better than the other backups. But I think the Jets are now pretty much set with their offensive line at the tackle position for 2024, with Smith at the left tackle spot and Moses at the right tackle spot. And when you talk about a rookie, one of the ways I like to think about it is 3 scenarios. What happens if everything goes perfectly? What happens if everything goes wrong? And what happens, kind of like the middle point? What's the most realistic scenario? Expecting some things to go right and some things to go wrong. It's kind of funny because with Fashanu, I almost view the boom scenario as he doesn't have to play this year, because that means Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses have stayed healthy and they've probably played at a pretty high level. How realistic that is with Tyron Smith in particular, I'm not really sure. But I guess if we're talking the boom scenario where he plays, it's something to the effect of, look, Tyron Smith's probably going to miss some time. He's missed some time for 8 straight seasons. Fashanu steps it right in and shows he belongs. And she looks like a guy who can play the left tackle position. And you go into next season, maybe something like Joe Tippmann last year, where he doesn't begin the season as a starter, but he steps in and looks like a player. And you hope that that's the start of something bigger. And I think that it's a very possible scenario for Fashanu. I think the bust, I don't want to say the bust scenario because he's not going to be a bust after 1 year. The disappointing scenario for Fashanu would be something along the lines of there's an injury at the tackle position, and it's a learning process for him, and he goes out there and really struggles, and the strength is an issue, and he just doesn't look, kind of the opposite of what I said. He doesn't really look like he belongs. The middle scenario is like the one I'm expecting if he has to play, which would be something to the effect of, and again, I'm expecting Fashanu to play snaps this year. And I think, anybody saying the Jets drafted a backup in the first round is kind of missing the point in a couple of areas. I think first of all, he wasn't drafted to be a long-term backup. They didn't draft him to be the backup for the next 4 years. They drafted him maybe to sit on the bench and learn for as long as he can the first year. But then his job is to take over the starting role. But the other reason I think the idea that they've drafted a backup 11th overall is incorrect is simply that, the Jets are dealing with 2 of the 5 oldest starting tackles in the league, and even though Morgan Moses has been healthy through his career, on the left side of the line, Tyron Smith has not. And I think it's very likely that anybody the Jets drafted at the tackle position would be playing significant snaps this year. And I think like the most likely scenario for Fashanu, if you follow the history of tackles, the recent history of tackles entering the league as rookies, you don't get a lot of like standout play. You don't get a lot of guys who step into the league and dominate from day one at the tackle position. You get more guys who just kind of like, they're fighting to hold their own. It's not an easy transition. The pass rushers are stronger, they're faster, and they're more developed than anybody you face in college. Most college defensive ends do not have an arsenal of moves. Most of them don't have a developed repertoire of pass rushing moves. And most of them, once you stop them, they're stopped. Once you neutralize them, they're neutralized. In the NFL, you get guys, you neutralize them, they have a plan B. There's this old phrase, pass rushing with a plan. And that's what happens in the NFL is guys are really smart in the NFL. It doesn't matter what position you play, guys are really smart. And essentially they attack a tackle, and they essentially say, all right, this is the first move I'm going to throw on. If he does this, then I'll do that. And if he does that, I'll do this. And it's a really kind of intricate game of chess. It's much more interesting than you might realize. And rookies tackles tend to struggle a bit. So I think like the kind of like the most likely scenario for Fashanu when he steps in there is, he'll look like he'll look okay. He'll have some shaky moments. I think the Jets are probably going to try and work on him to build up that strength a bit moving forward. And, he'll look decent enough. I don't think he's going to look like a disaster. He'll get you through. He'll kind of play at the level you'd hope from a backup tackle. And you hope that he builds on it, because the first year, again, is typically the least important year for guys who are drafted high. If they step right in and dominate like Garrett Wilson or Breece Hall or Sauce Gardner, that's great. But I think, different position. But the Jermaine Johnson trajectory is more common where, they step in and looked okay, but, they're not dominating anybody. And then year 2 is the year where you look for the big breakout. And I think that's certainly going to be the ccase with the Jets, because you look to 2025. I mean, I don't think there's any question Olu Fashanu is the projected starter at the left tackle position. And, this may have been different if they had gone in a different direction in the draft, but Tyron Smith is now, I think, officially on the clock. He's now officially just a 1-year player from this team. And it's a great opportunity for Fashanu because he gets a chance to kind of sit behind and learn from the best left tackle of his generation. This is a real opportunity for Fashanu. Other places he'd get thrown into the fire right away. Now, not only does he get a chance to sit to work on his strength, but he gets to learn how to prepare. He gets to learn technique. He gets to learn the tricks of the trade from a guy who might be a future Hall of Famer. That's not really a bad thing. Now, head on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the Jets' second pick, Malachi Corley. What are expectations for him? I talked about him a bit yesterday. I think that we got to put some realistic expectations, give this kid some realistic expectations. Don't put the weight of the world on his shoulder. And we'll go into more detail on that as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We've got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends with when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it for free on Google Play or the App Stores. Game on. Again, it's Monopoly Go. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And if you're a fan of Locked On Jets, you should also check out Locked On Sports Today. You may be tired of having Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, and then you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today on Locked On Jets, we're talking about the Jets draft class of 2024 and expectations for them as rookies. And now we're going to move on to Malachi Corley, who was the Jets pick in the third round. He was the second player the Jets drafted. The Jets traded up from 72 to 65 to get him. And as soon as they did it, I mean, the hype went off the charts for Corley, and not unfairly. I mean, if you watch him, I mean, he's just a really physical guy who plays the receiver position like a running back. In fact, as I said yesterday, if you look at what his actual role was, if you take away like the positional designation, if you take away like the fact he was listed as a wide receiver, if you actually like look at what his role, there are many ways what he did resembled what a running back does more than what a receiver does in the NFL, because over half of his catches were screens. So essentially, he wasn't going out running a ton of routes. He wasn't running a diverse route tree. He was essentially getting the ball in his hands and reading the blocks and trying to make plays in space. And I think for year one, that's probably going to be the most likely role for him. Now, I think, if we talk about the three scenarios, what's the boom role? Well, the boom role is that, he really, really takes to route running. That, he just, and this is sometimes happens, is that, just because a guy didn't run routes in college doesn't mean he's incapable of running routes. You see this all the time where it's like a lot of college offenses are very simplistic in what they ask their receivers to do, but that doesn't mean you necessarily lack the capability to do it. Now with Aaron Rodgers, we're talking about a slot receiver. Aaron Rodgers wants him to run very, very precise routes. I mean, it's like the timing needs to be perfect. It's a very intricate process, far more intricate than people realize. And you hear stories about Aaron Rodgers being hard on rookie receivers. That's the real reason. And it's kind of like on the field, Aaron Rodgers is like a football genius. And Aaron Rodgers is the football genius who wants everybody to do things exactly. I don't want to use the phrase he doesn't suffer fools easily, because I don't want to make it sound like receivers are fools. But essentially, Aaron Rodgers wants people to be on his level. He wants people to be in the right spot at the right time, not 1 yard off, not a split second late. He wants you to be in the exact spot he's expecting you to be in. And that's the reason it's hard for young receivers to play with Aaron Rodgers. And you saw there are a lot of examples through the years. I mean, even Davante Adams, it took a while. It took a couple of years for Rodgers to really develop trust in Davante Adams, as great as Davante Adams became. So it's not an easy thing, especially for somebody like Corley, who's projected to play in the slot. In the slot, you run what are known as option routes, where the defender kind of takes you to the right spots. You could either break left or break right, and you kind of read where the defender is, and you essentially try and figure out which area would be the tougher area for me to run. Corley didn't really do that in college. He didn't really run a lot of very precise routes. So if he can step in and show, what, I could have done that in college, my coach just didn't ask me to do it, then we could be talking about a huge rookie season. But as I said yesterday, I just feel like the New York media is placing the weight of the world on Corley's shoulders. You listen to what they have to say. They're talking about Deebo Samuel. I mean, can we give this kid a chance to step onto the field? Can we give this kid a chance to grow? Do we need to put those expectations on him so quickly? And the reason I don't like it when the media does that is it's not that the player necessarily lacks the upside. It's more that, you're putting him in a position where the expectations are so high that he could be good, and people will still view it as a disappointment. I don't want to say the bust scenario, because again, nobody's a bust after 1 year. The disappointing scenario would be, Corley not taking to the route running and him not looking, as dynamic with the ball in his hands as he did in college. And if you watched him in college, I mean, he was very talented at forcing missed tackles. I mean, he was a guy who was a very physical runner. I mean, easy to fall in love with the film because the guy who just he did not go down easily. He's the kind of guy like fans love. If he plays like this in the NFL, he's going to be a fan favorite because he's just really tough. He runs through tackles. He loves contact. He loves beating guys. It's going to be a beautiful thing. But there's always a question of how it's going to translate to the NFL. And of course, the bad scenario would be something like he didn't produce a whole lot. I think the median scenario is probably something along the lines of the Jets carve out a role for him on offense, and he's kind of like a supercharged version of what Xavier Gipson did last year, where last year they'd give Xavier Gipson a couple of touches a game, manufactured in space. In fact, Xavier Gipson might be the odd man out because of Corley, because in theory, everything Corley can do, everything Xavier Gipson could do, Corley should be able to do and better. And I think, it's one of those. Now, the question is whether the Jets have the offensive coordinator who's creative enough to take advantage of this. But I would view Corley as more of like a movable chess piece, a guy who, and I said this yesterday, I'd line him up in the backfield. I'd give him some carries out of the backfield. I mean, what he did in college much more resembles, in many ways, what a running back did more than what a receiver did. I mean, give him some carries. He's tough to bring down with the ball in his hands. He's a playmaker. Get him in the backfield, get him some opportunities there. But of course, also you'll see the manufactured touches, you'll see the jet sweeps, you'll see the screens, you'll see the Jets make an effort to get in the ball in space. And even though he wasn't really a return guy in college, I could see him kind of taking on the kickoff return role for the Jets. I mean, you don't necessarily need to be a return man in college to figure it out in the NFL. Again, it's very similar. You're just trying to make plays with the ball in your hands. I don't know that they might give him a shot in preseason to see like whether he can handle punt returns. I'd be a little bit more hesitant to run him out there on punt returns, though. It's a different game, on the kickoff returns, especially with the new rules. You're going to be able to catch the ball pretty easily and have the open field in front of you. With punt returns, you have two guys. You have like at least two guys bearing down on you. You have to make a decision as you're trying to catch the ball. So you're trying to catch the ball in traffic. Then you have to make a decision: do I fair catch it? Do I try and return it? It's a more difficult thing, and you frequently see rookies struggle in the punt return role. So I don't know that I'd have him returning punts, but guy that kind of just carves out his own role in the offense, and is a nice, a nice addition, a guy who adds a little extra elements, because Xavier Gipson had that role last year, but he didn't do a whole lot with it. So Corley could be the guy who steps in and gives the Jets a turbocharged player in that role, somebody defenses always need to account for, and then works on his route running. And it's not the end of the world. This is not the end of this is not the last year of his career. It's the first year of his career. I think for Corley, the focus is going to be working on his route running and hopefully develop into like a more prominent receiver. And as he does, he'll have the opportunity to potentially take on a bigger role in years ahead. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the day 3 picks. Always a good idea to kind of calibrate your expectations for guys who are drafted in the 4th through 7th rounds in year 1. But we'll go into more detail and talk about what the Jets may be looking for as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. What a time it is for New York sports right now. Knicks and Rangers, both looking pretty good in their playoff runs, kind of resembling the epic summer of '94 from 30 years ago. Baseball's underway. So much to bet on, and FanDuel is the place to do it. Again, $150 in bonus bets guaranteed, $150, win or lose. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. Again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon to make that first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about expectations for rookies for the Jets drafted over the weekend in the year 2024. We've talked about Olu Fashanu. We've talked about Malachi Corley. Now let's talk about the day 3 picks. And look, you usually don't get big contributions from your day 3 picks. So, I think expectations need to be pretty low. I think especially when you get to the back of the roster, you're talking about guys who are likely practice squatters. You're talking about guys who, probably you didn't even draft them for this year. But I think there are a couple of guys who could conceivably carve out roles for the Jets this year. And it's at the position where you're most likely to get an immediate impact. That's the running back position. And Jets drafted 2 guys on day 3 of the draft. And look, that was not a popular decision the Jets made. A lot of people in the fan base were very upset that the Jets drafted a pair of running backs on day 3. There were Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin and Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State. And I think that these guys clearly have a role. These guys are going to have an opportunity to carve out a role because the Jets don't really have a lot of depth at the running back position behind Breece Hall. Breece is going to be the number 1 back, of course, but the guy who was the number 2 back last year, Dalvin Cook, is gone. Thank goodness for that. That was a disaster signing. I should delete the episode where I said that was a good signing back in August last year. The only other guy who's a contender for that role is Izzy Abanikanda, who played kind of sparingly last year, and I wasn't super impressed by what I saw from Izzy. I see a lot of shock that like the Jets may bump Izzy off the roster, and I don't really know why, because he was a day 3 pick last year, and it's not like he went out and dominated. Not like he went out and played like Breece last year. I mean, when he got the opportunities, and it wasn't all his fault. The blocking was really bad, but it's not like Izzy really popped out on the screen. It's not like he dominated on the film. So you have a couple guys who are bigger backs. Braylon Allen in particular, weighs in like the 230. I think the combine he weighed in around the 235 range. Last season he said he played around 245, so really big back. And then Isaiah Davis, 6 feet, 218 pounds. And these are both guys who are, I don't want to say thumpers, but guys who are more in between the tackles types than guys who than backs who are burners. And I think they're going to be in direct competition with each other, and they'll be in a direct competition with Izzy. And one of them actually could carve out a role with this team. And it's kind of funny because the Jets did draft 2 backs, and everybody hates the Davis pick because he was the second of the 2 backs who was drafted. But I gotta say, like, after watching these 2 guys on film, at this point at least, and it's still early in the process, but I don't know, I kind of like Davis better. I kind of think he's got a real shot to end up as the number 2 back. And the reports over the weekend were that the Jets offensive coaching staff was really pounding the table for Davis. Now it's the Jets offensive coaching staff, so who knows whether that was a good decision. I mean, they've certainly made some poor decisions in their time, but this is the one spot, and running back's a position where the transition isn't as difficult as a lot of other spots, because in many ways it's like, at the wide receiver position, like we talked about with Corley, you have to learn how to run routes. You have to learn how to run intricate routes. There's a lot of, you have to learn how to, get a release off the line of scrimmage. There's a lot of very intricate stuff at the wide receiver position. On many levels, running backs you either make a play or you don't. You get the ball in your hands, go do something. It's kind of similar to what you do in college. Now, there are some trickier parts to it because, you have to figure out pass protection, which a lot of young backs struggle with. And, from what I've seen of Davis and Allen, they're no exception. I mean, Allen has some if you look at Allen's film, like there's some games where like he flashed a little bit in pass protection, but very inconsistent, as most young players are. But running back's still a position where you can get an immediate contribution. And I think that it is definitely possible that one of these guys could step into the lineup and actually play a role for the Jets in 2024. I don't think the same can be said of like any of these other day 3 picks. Jordan Travis, the quarterback the Jets drafted out of Florida State. Well, we know what the deal is. He's not going to be the starting quarterback. He's not going to be the backup quarterback. He's going to be the developmental quarterback. He'll be the number 3 quarterback. If he's healthy enough to get onto the active roster, he'll be your number 3 quarterback on game day, because last year the NFL brought back the 3rd quarterback rule, which essentially means that you have an extra roster spot dedicated to an active player who's your emergency quarterback. Every game, you're allowed to activate 47 to 48 of your 53 players. You have to leave some players on active. 47 to 48 can be active. And whether it's 47 or 48 depends on how many offensive linemen you activate. There are rules involving that. But the league last year, because of what happened to the 49ers in the NFC Championship game 2 years ago, where all their quarterbacks got hurt, the league essentially created a rule last year that you're allowed to have a 3rd quarterback active who does not count against your allotment of 47 to 48, as long as he's the number 3 quarterback. So now Jordan Travis, if he's healthy enough, he'll be the guy who's the number 3 quarterback on game day. You hope you never use your number 3 quarterback, and he'll just be he'll learn behind Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor. He'll pretty much take a redshirt year of coming off, which he would have done coming off an injury anyway. And the Jets will hope that, he develops into something down the line. And when we're talking about a 5th-round pick, if he develops into a quality backup quarterback, that's still a pretty good outcome for him. But that's going to be the hope. I don't see him having a big role this year. And I think the same could go with the 2 guys the Jets drafted in the secondary at the end of the draft. Quantez Stiggers, he was the corner the Jets drafted out of the CFL, and Jaylen Key, the defensive back out of Alabama. I mean, I think if either of these guys makes the team, it's going to be because they've carved out a role on special teams. And we do know that, the back of the roster for the Jets don't always view it the way a lot of teams do. A lot of teams say, like, we need X number of running backs, we need X number of wide receivers, we need X number of tight ends, we need X number of linebackers. It doesn't seem like the Jets do that. It seems like the Jets do give Brant Voyer a vote. And essentially, those last few roster spots are dedicated to guys who help on special teams. Even if it's like keeping a 4th running back, if it's something unconventional, if like that guy can help the Jets on special teams, they're willing to do it. And Brant Voyer does have a voice over the bottom of the roster. I'm not sure he's the one making the picks, but I do think they seriously consider what he has to say. And if either of these guys flash on special teams in preseason, and look, they're going to get every opportunity to do that, they could end up carving out a role. Now, Jaylen Key, I think, is a little different. I think Jaylen Key is a guy who, probably maxes out as a special teams ace, and if he can do it, and we don't know that. Stiggers is a more interesting story. I mean, if you haven't followed this story, they're going to make a movie out of it where, he never played college football, and he suffered a tragedy. Like 4 years ago, his father was tragically killed, and he left school, and then his mom signed him up for this football league that was this indoor football league, this minor like professional football league, and he caught the attention of a guy who had ties to the Canadian Football League, so he ends up going to the CFL and has a great season with Toronto. I mean, what a story this is. I mean, I think I don't know how you evaluate him, and kudos to the Jets coaching staff if this kid turns into a player. But it's an amazing story, and it's like this could be, I'm kind of hoping that this is an example of finding an under the radar talent, because just really an amazing tale. I think for year 1, though, I expect special teams, if not practice squad. I think those 2 guys, they'll either show they can contribute on specials, or they're probably heading to the practice squad. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we'll have our weekly mailbag show. Can't wait to answer them.